Welcome to Catalina Park Racing Circuit, located in the heart of New South Wales Blue Mountains town, Katoomba. Now, Catalina Park differs a little bit from our other Australian history racing temporary circuits we've been looking at, as this was a purpose-built racetrack that actually still exists today, though the track has not seen a car drive on it since the 25th of January 1970. In today's video, I am recreating a Touring Car Championships race at Catalina Park that took place on Sunday the 18th of August 1968, and I'm doing this in the digital domain on a racing simulator called R-Factor. So my plan is to jump in my DIY 4 Degree of Freedom motion simulator platform that you can see me sitting in and driving in at the moment, and we're going to talk about Catalina Park's history, how it came about, some of the controversial things that took place to build this track, and how it positively contributed to the Australian motorsport scene. And if you're interested in building a 4 Degree of Freedom motion simulator platform for your racing sim experience, click on this link here now to my tutorial series on how to build a 4 Degree of Freedom motion simulator platform. And if you enjoy my content, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, I was a little bit limited with my car choice for a 1968 Touring Car Championship in R-Factor. As a result, I've had to choose some later Australian Touring Car Championship cars to field in this race, but they're not too far removed from 1968, so it still gives us the vibe we want as we talk about the history of Catalina Park. The track was located inside Frank Walford Park in Katoomba, in an area otherwise known as the Gully. The idea to build a racing circuit in the park was first floated as early as 1953, when members of the Blue Mountains Sporting Car Club began discussions with local council. Their idea was to create a 2.4 kilometre circuit inside the gully, hugging the tight confines of the rocky outcrops. This plan to build Catalina Park in the gully actually divided the community, as it would mean the removal and relocation of an Aboriginal camp that had been in place in the gully since World War II. According to a recent study on the subject by the Blue Ridge Mountains Council, the inhabitants of the camp were accepted as individuals, but their status as outsiders remained. And when it became possible for the respectable citizens of the town to remove the camp by building the Catalina racing circuit in the late 1950s, the opportunity was taken and this small community was destroyed. A man-made lake was located right next to Catalina Park, and that has an interesting and related history of its own. It was owned by Hoary Gates, a local hotelier and cabaret club owner. In 1946, Gates decided to create a new tourist attraction and dammed Katoomba Falls Creek to form an ornamental lake, around which he constructed an amusement park offering every facility for fun and food. The park was an instant success, boasting attractions including speedboat rides, tea rooms, a miniature train, a Ferris wheel, a merry-go-round, a swimming pool, and a small cinema showing Charlie Chaplin films. Then in 1948, the shell of a consolidated Catalina PBY-5 flying boat was added to the attractions. Anchored to a concrete block in the middle of the lake, while it may have looked like it had simply landed on the lake, in reality it had been dismantled and brought to Katoomba by truck. It was after this local curiosity that the circuit would take its eventual name. In what might have been the first flight simulator offering in Australia, up to 30 paying guests would be taken out to the plane by boat, inside which they could watch a film of flight over the Sydney area before being told the story of the Catalina and allowed to try out the controls. An assistant standing on the wings would rock the plane during film showings, while the speedboat circled the lake to give extra engine noise atmosphere. Highly technical stuff for the time. The council purchased the land in 1952 with the aim of turning the area into a public park and a treated water swimming pool. This did finally eventuate with the opening of an Olympic-sized pool in 1972. In 1954, the iconic Catalina aircraft, showing signs of age and wear, was pulled up onto the bank and left to the ravages of weather and souvenir hunters. Around 1958, it was sold to Sheffield Welding and Engineering in Auburn, New South Wales, and they dismantled it and cut it up for scrap. It was around this same time that interest in the land for motor racing began to become more serious. Blue Mountains Council accepted the proposals and land clearance commenced in 1957. The course would hug the hillsides, creating a narrow but fast circuit which resembled a clover leaf. The council provided the earth-moving gear, but the workers who actually drove the diggers and graders were also members of the Blue Mountains Sporting Car Club. Each Friday they would drive out to the site to camp and work the land in their spare time, returning home on either Sunday nights or Monday mornings. It is said that Jack Brabham had some form of consultancy in the circuit's design, though given that it was largely constrained by the contours of the land, it is uncertain as to what that practically might have involved. Brabham's first wife Betty was originally from Katoomba, so this may have presented the local connection. Construction proved slow going, hampered by a lack of funding and people power as much as the unpredictable weather, which often brought dense fog to the hillside, a factor that would plague the circuit through its operating life. By May 1959, progress was such that the shacks of the last gully residents were being demolished to make way for what would become the area of the track at Craven A Corner. Bulldozers also gouged through the aquifer, destroying the original spring. Added impetus to complete the circuit came from the Australian Racing Drivers Club following the closure of Mount Druitt Racing Circuit. Extra manpower saw the circuit finally get to a finished state, although the original opening date in 1960 came and went without being achieved. Catalina Park finally opened in February 1962, ironically the same month as another New South Wales circuit, Oran Park, located much closer to Sydney. The racers at the first meeting found they had a thrilling, if rather dangerous, new playground to explore. From the downhill starting line on what was officially known as KLG Straight, the circuit bottomed out, then climbed again quite steeply through a gradual right-hander before levelling out again on the approach to the 180-degree Dunlop corner. From here it was another plunge back down the hillside and then up again through a fast, sweeping series of bends to Craven A Corner, named after a famous brand of cigarettes. Next came the most daunting section, as the track once again headed sharply downhill through a sweeping left-hander towards the Bosch corner, which then led into the final downhill bend, Energol corner, although more commonly referred to as the Tunnel of Love, thanks to its rather hemmed-in nature. On this note, I must say the creators of Catalina Park for R-Factor 1, they've done a pretty good job, and definitely having a motion simulator really captures the steepness of Catalina Park and how dangerous it actually was. The way I get thrown around, the way the motion simulator pitches right down when I'm going down the steep descents, but it pitches up going up the steep ascents, the way it throws you all around in the corners. It really was a really challenging and scary track. If the track layout wasn't challenging enough, the fact that it was lined on its outside by a combination of Armco barrier, rocky hillsides or removable wooden walls, while the inside presented sheer drops for anyone unlucky enough to clear the barriers, only served to enhance the danger factor. Given these challenges, it is perhaps surprising that the circuit was also licensed for motorcycle racing, and even more surprising that the only fatalities occurred during car races. Ron Hodgson had the distinction of setting the first lap record of 1 minute 16.4 seconds for an average speed of 98.48 kilometres an hour at the first race meeting in February 1961, though it was quickly lowered to 1 minute and 2 seconds at an average speed of 119.69 kilometres an hour by Frank Matejka in a Lotus 15. Matejka was one of the stars of Catalina Park and would ultimately go on to lower the outright record to 53.4 seconds, done at an average speed of 141.1 kilometres an hour in his self-built Matejka SR4 Repco in 1969. Despite being around an hour's drive through difficult terrain from Sydney, Catalina Park nevertheless attracted decent crowds, helped by many of the stars of the day turning out to race there. Among the regulars were Leo Gehennigan, Greg Cusack, John Yule, Spencer Martin, Frank Gardner, Kevin Bartlett and Frank Matejka in open wheelers. Matejka also featured in sports car events, along with the likes of Neil Allen, Fred Gibson, Spencer Martin and others. Touring cars were also very popular, with the Mustangs of Norm Beechey, Ian Gehogan, Neil Allen, with the Mustangs of Norm Beechey, Ian Gehogan and Neil Allen waging epic battles across Chevy Camaros, Holden Monaros and the Minis of Brian Foley and Peter Manton, as well as the many Lotus Cortinas that would make up the grids. It was during a 1965 car clash that Bob Jane had the infamous accident when a rear axle broke on his Ford Mustang, pitching the car into a barrel roll over the wooden fence at Dunlop Corner before finishing on its roof, its driver emerging shaken but otherwise unhurt. These epic motor races were the heyday of Catalina Park, but were quickly faded by the much closer and more convenient located Amaroo Park and Oran Park in Sydney. The Australian Racers Driving Club decided to up sticks in 1970 entirely and head to the new Amaroo Park, and with Sydney also boasting Oran Park, the crowds began to thin, perhaps tired of the long trek out to Katoomba, often to face long delays at the fog-bound circuit. And thus the curtain finally came down on this unique part of Australia's motorsport heritage. Perhaps unusually, the circuit today still remains undeveloped, helped in part by its designation as an Aboriginal place in 2005, the largest of its type in New South Wales. Legislation requires the landholder, the Blue Mountains City Council, together with the New South Wales Department of Lands, to work with the Gully traditional owners to protect the Indigenous heritage of the area, so it is unlikely to ever be ploughed under. The most likely scenario will see it continue to be publicly accessible, with any remnants of the original settlements preserved and promoted, while the circuit itself will gently fade away into the undergrowth. It's hard to shed a tear for Catalina Park and its passing, given the somewhat unjust nature of its first development and its creation. Despite this, however, the track was still a favourite track of many drivers that went on to be very famous in the Australian motorsport scene. So you could say that Catalina Park helped drivers cut their teeth as race car drivers, a legacy that lives on today in our V8 supercar series that races regularly at different locations in Australia. Thank you so much for tuning in today as we look at Australian racing history. And in my next video, we're going to look at Lakeside International Raceway, now known as Lakeside Park, located in Queensland, Australia. Until I see you in that video, you guys stay safe, stay healthy, and take it easy out there.